Hi friends, welcome to Chapter 8, Nonverbal Influence. In this presentation, I'll cover the nature and characteristics of nonverbal communication, the functions of nonverbal communication, and the various types of nonverbal communication as they relate to persuasion. So let's go ahead and get started with the nature and characteristics of nonverbal communication. Nonverbal communication is essentially messages expressed by non-linguistic means. It's how you say a message, not necessarily what you say. That's the prevailing wisdom as it pertains to nonverbal communication. We know that 60% of our communication is nonverbal, and past research has shown that 93% of the emotional meaning of a message is carried via nonverbal channels. Again, supporting the idea that it's not what you say, it's how you say it. As adults, even children, we tend to believe what we see and not necessarily what we hear. So the idea is that, yeah, we can't present a bunch of weak arguments or babble on incoherently and do it in a way that sounds great and people are going to be persuaded by that. So I do take issue with this, statement that it's not what you say, it's how you say it. I think equally, both are equally important. We want congruency between the content of our message but also saying it in a way or packaging or communicating it in a way that makes a profound impact on the audience. So if you were to ask me, both what we say and how we say it are really important. Because if there's incongruency between those two, then we lose credibility or we miss an opportunity to make a profound impact on our audience. So the key characteristic of nonverbal communication is that all nonverbal communication plays an important role in social influence, and all nonverbal behavior has communicative value. So keep that in mind when you're going about your day and you're communicating. Just realize that everything that you do or say and how you say it is going to be interpreted by your audience. So let's discuss the nature of nonverbal communication. First and foremost, nonverbal communication is often transmitted unconsciously, yet has a profound impact on the audience. So, what we wear, how we position our body, our facial expressions, eye contact, the artifacts or the accessories that we wear, the type of brands that we purchase. All of these things have communicative value, but oftentimes we're unconscious of how these messages or what these messages are communicating. So the idea is to become more conscientious of how we're using our nonverbal behavior to add an additional layer of appeal to the messages that we're communicating. We see that nonverbal communication is usually relationally oriented. So the longer you've been in a relationship with someone or have a friendship with someone or have communicated with someone, the easier it is to encode and decode messages. We see that nonverbal communication is inherently ambiguous and unclear. So there's no one clear interpretation for sustained eye contact, right? Eye contact could mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. In fact, eye contact in different cultures could be a sign of aggression. Whereas here in Western societies, we typically value eye contact and interpret it as a sign of respect. As the quote goes, the eyes are the windows to the soul. So we often see people who are in love gazing into each other's eyes because they want to establish that connection with the other person. So again, this just illustrates that nonverbal communication is inherently ambiguous and unclear. Nonverbal communication tends to be rooted in biology, but with various cultural elements. So different cultures value different nonverbal behaviors. We see that nonverbal communication is often continuous. So it's not like we can stop sending off nonverbal communication. What we can do is be more conscious of our nonverbal communication and the interpretations people are assigning to our nonverbal behavior. And we see that nonverbal communication is multi-channeled. It doesn't rely on just one aspect of nonverbal communication, such as like eye contact. So, eye contact, vocalics, our body posture, how close we're standing or how far we're standing away from someone, all of these interact with each other to create a bigger effect on our communication. So now that we know a little bit about nonverbal communication, what it is, some of the characteristics, let's discuss briefly the functions of nonverbal communication. We see that nonverbal communication assists in impression management. And we could look at Goffman's impression management theory, which suggests that the process in which people try to influence the perception of impressions others have about them by regulating and controlling information, essentially nonverbal cues. So essentially, we try to control the interpretations or the impressions people have of us by controlling our nonverbal behaviors, right? So if you go into the office and you want your colleagues to take you seriously, you might dress up a little bit. You might look the part, right? Or if you are giving a class presentation, right, and you want to receive that A for that presentation, you're going to probably control maybe your nervousness so you appear confident to your classmates and your professor, right? So we see this impression management in a lot of different aspects, but we see that we often try to shape the impressions people have of us in terms of our level of attractiveness. That's why I would argue that before maybe a first date, we take extra time to make ourselves presentable. Or maybe online, we use a filter that maybe eliminates the blemishes on our face. So, we can control the impressions of maybe others in terms of our level of attractiveness, but we could also do this as it relates to credibility and status. So that's the first function. The second function, it helps us establish intimate relationships. So the behaviors that we use to create emotional closeness with someone are immediacy behaviors. So immediacy and rapport, such as closeness, touching, smiling, showing engagement, all of these contribute to a sense of warmth and closeness between communicators. And that can help establish intimate relationships between two people. We see that nonverbal communication can either heighten or distract attention from persuasive messages. So our nonverbal behavior can heighten attention. Again, if we communicate in a dynamic, charismatic way, that could enhance people's attentiveness to our message. But if maybe we allow our nervousness get in the way and we start fidgeting or stumbling on our words or breaking engagement with the people we're talking to and maybe look down or maybe shift our body posture to turn away from someone, or if we feel vulnerable, we might close ourselves off by using these closed body postures. All of these behaviors could be distracting for a communicator or our message for the audience. We see that nonverbal communication can reinforce or model behavioral compliance. So we usually imitate behavior. So I discussed pro-social modeling in entertainment education at the beginning of the semester. And this is rooted in Bandura's social learning theory that suggests that entertainment education, usually if they're trying to change or influence public behavior, and they're trying to create more pro-social behavior in a society, what they would do is take a character, a beloved character, someone that the audience could relate to, and they have that character do behaviors or take on values or have attitudes towards something in a way that makes whatever the program is trying to implement more attractive. So usually the character or the characters in a show will be rewarded for the good behavior that they're trying to model. And the idea is that they're modeling this pro-social behavior, and because the audience members like the character, they're more than likely going to imitate the behavior. So we see that nonverbal communication can reinforce or model behavioral compliance. And then lastly, signal expectations of behavior. So if you frown when someone says something, that could signal expectations of what's appropriate or inappropriate in that conversation. Or, when you smile, that may encourage other behavior. Again, open and closed body postures could also signal expectations. So now that we have a better understanding of the different functions of nonverbal communication, let's go ahead and discuss this direct effects model of immediacy. And this stems from Anderson's research that supports this direct effects model of immediacy. And this model suggests that warm, involving immediate behaviors enhance persuasiveness of a message. So usually you can, as the old saying goes, you catch more flies with honey than you do vinegar, right? So if we're cold, if we're distant, and if we're mean and we're trying to persuade people, chances are that's not going to work in our favor. So what is this nonverbal immediacy? So nonverbal immediacy is nonverbal communicative behaviors that reflect psychological availability, communicate affiliation and preference, and result in perceived interpersonal closeness. So anything that you do that creates a sense of psychological availability, communicate affiliation, so you affiliate with the other person, and you show preference on the other person, these result in perceived interpersonal closeness. So if you can develop interpersonal closeness, chances are you're going to also increase the influence you have on someone. So we do this by usually showing warm cues, such as smiling, leaning in closer. We close proxemics or spatial gaps between communicators. We engage in eye contact. We might nod in agreement. We might use open body posture, and so forth. So we could look at really two ideas as it relates to this direct effects model of immediacy. First is confirmation bias. As humans, we tend to have this bias or this tendency to select and interpret data that confirms or supports one's prior beliefs and values. So it's usually easier to comply with those that we like. So if someone likes us, then everything that we do or say is going to maybe be interpreted based on someone's confirmation bias. This is also related to this concept of the halo effect. And this is the tendency to form an overall positive impression on the basis of one positive characteristic. So maybe because someone has just one positive thing going for them, and we perceive that characteristic as positive, we typically engage in this bias where we develop an overall positive impression of someone. So this is why we assume attractive people in the media are warm and loving people, right? Or this is why we believe or trust charismatic individuals, is because they have this charisma, this passion about them. Or nonverbal immediacy. So based off of just one positive characteristic, we engage in this bias and just assume that because someone's attractive, they're a great person, or just because they're charismatic or passionate, they're a great person, or just because they dress a certain way, speak a certain way, that they're highly credible and trustworthy. So humans tend to trust warm, friendly people. So the idea, again, is that as persuaders, we don't want to be jerks. We don't want to be mean. We want to be warm, friendly people because people respond well to that. So now that we understand a little bit more about nonverbal communication, let's go ahead and discuss the different types of nonverbal communication. There's a lot of different types, but we'll cover these four predominant nonverbal communication behaviors. The first one is kinesics, which is the study and interpretation of human body movements as communication. So think about eye contact, facial expressions, hand gestures, and body movements. So all of these pertain to the human body and how we use the human body to communicate through non-linguistic means. So eye contact could mean a lot of different things. It means engagement, maybe respect, and so forth. Facial expressions, give maybe our emotional state away. So if you're embarrassed, you might smile, but you might smile to show that you're a friendly person. Hand gestures, we might show our palms or wave at someone to show like, hey, look, I'm not carrying any weapons, so you can trust me, which would look really differently if you had your hands behind your back and you smiled when greeting someone. That would create conflicting messages. So again, the idea is that we could study all of this as it relates to persuasion. The next type of nonverbal communication is haptics. This is the study and interpretation of human touch as communication. And human touch becomes really important. And in past research, studies have found that just a gentle touch increased compliance to levels of 96%, whereas no touch resulted in only 63% of compliance. We see that effective when touch is perceived as friendly and warm. So, while touch is a really powerful way to non-verbally communicate with someone, that could really increase the perceptiveness of your message. It could increase compliance gaining and social influence. Be very cautious of going around touching people when you're asking them to, comply to your requests, right? So no creepy touches. In fact, if touches are perceived negatively, they usually have dire consequences. So that's why it's always important to, be mindful of how you're interacting with people. However, when touch is done effectively, it increases the effects of this foot in the door strategy. And this is a strategy where someone will make small requests and then follow up with a larger request. So it's like systematically increasing the weight of a request. So if someone is, likely to give you 30 seconds of their attention, then you might be able to persuade them to give you more attention after that first initial request. The third type is proxemics. This is a study and interpretation of space as communication. So we could look at some research by Edward T. Hall and essentially how he conceptualized distance zones. And based on his research, he developed these categories in how we use space, or how we essentially reserve space for people in our lives. So intimate space is usually between 0 to 18 inches. This is, our personal space. We usually reserve this for very close, trusted people within our lives. Then personal space is between 18 and 48 inches. Social space is between about 4 to 12 feet. And then public space is 12 feet and beyond. So So the book talks about how we could use space to leverage our persuasiveness, the influence and compliance gaining. But again, some of the research is mixed on this. So a better way to understand how to use space and whether or not to invade someone's personal space, thinking that that's going to be more persuasive, we could look at Judy Burgoon's expectancy violation theory, which suggests that we all have certain expectations, and when those expectations are violated, we usually have a negative or positive reaction or valence. And really, this depends on the reward value of a violation. So if, let's say, you received flowers unexpectedly at work, right? This violated your expectation because you were not expecting this, but would you have a positive or negative reaction? Well, I don't know about you, but most people who receive flowers feel that this is, a reward. It's a rewarding experience. So chances are they're going to have a positive reaction to that expectation, that violated expectation. Or getting a raise unexpectedly at work. Again, you were not expecting this raise, and getting it violated those expectations, but the reward value was great, so therefore you're going to have a positive reaction to it. Or if you're randomly getting slapped by Will Smith unexpectedly, again, you were not expecting Will Smith to come up and slap you, but he did, right? That violated your expectation. The reward value, pretty low. Like, I don't think anyone enjoys being slapped. Therefore, that violation of expectations would result in probably a negative valence or negative reaction. So again, the reason why I mentioned Judy Burgoon's expectancy violation theory is because this stemmed from her study on how people use their space, and why sometimes we feel uncomfortable if someone invades our personal space. And so she observed that and developed this theory, and it's expanded into different aspects of communication. The last is paralinguistics or vocalics. This is the study of vocal stimuli aside from spoken words. So think about the pitch, the rate, the volume, the tone, pauses, intonation patterns, the rise and the fall of your voice. All of these play an important role in persuasion. This is getting at that it's not what you say, how you say it, and how we say something can change the meaning and the persuasiveness. One of my friends from grad school, she did her master's thesis on intonation patterns and how they influence perceived credibility. Intonation patterns is essentially, well, you've probably heard the term uptalk. This is a popular way of describing upward intonation patterns. And this is the tendency to increase the pitch at the end of a statement. So this is upward intonation patterns, sometimes called uptalk. So to give you an example, if I were to introduce myself and say, "Hi, my name is Colin Steele. I am going to be teaching COM 12 this semester. I have a degree from Cal State Fullerton. I'm getting my PhD from Regent University." That upward intonation pattern towards the end of a statement makes it sound like a question, right? And it lacks confidence. So people who often use this upward intonation pattern or this uptalk are perceived as lacking credibility or confidence. So if you want to be credible and sound confident, then maybe you use a downward intonation pattern at the end of statements where So for example, "Hi, my name is Colin Steele. I am going to be teaching COM 2 persuasion this semester. I have a degree at Cal State Fullerton and working on my PhD from Regent University." Right? It's having that downward intonation pattern communicates declaration, assertiveness, confidence in what we're saying. So here's a few more just random things about nonverbal communication that I find fascinating. The first one is some research done by Carney, Amy Cuddy, and Yap in 2010. They published an article in Psychological Science entitled Power Posing, Brief Nonverbal Displays Affect Neuroendocrine Levels and Risk Tolerance. Essentially, the research team found that people who demonstrated a high power pose were perceived as more powerful and felt more powerful than those who were engaged in a low power pose. So the research team, specifically Amy Cuddy, found observed in not only nature but also behavior with humans that people who have more power tend to take up more space. They tend to be more expressive with their body. And people who have low power or low status tend to make themselves smaller. So I don't know about you, but maybe when you feel vulnerable or embarrassed, or maybe if you feel like you don't have power in a certain situation, you try making yourself smaller, right? You try protecting yourself. And so what she wanted to do was put participants into these two conditions to see if merely changing our nonverbal postures would influence two hormones related to the neuroendocrine system, specifically testosterone and cortisol. So in this graph, you'll see that these are the results of the pre and post saliva samples that she took before putting people into a high power pose condition or a low power pose condition for just 2 minutes. So this is how much their hormones changed by engaging in a position for 2 minutes. So we see testosterone is the assertive, aggressive hormone. So typically when people have higher testosterone, they feel more confident and aggressive, more powerful in their interactions. And simply by doing a high power pose for 2 minutes, participants were successfully able to increase their levels of testosterone. And those who were in a low power pose, right, had a decrease in testosterone. So they felt less, aggressive, less confident, less powerful. The other hormone that the researchers measured was cortisol. Cortisol is a stress hormone. So if you've ever felt your sympathetic nervous system activate, where you had an increase in adrenaline, or maybe you perceived a threat where your body responded with that fight or flight response, where it's like, I'm either going to fight or I'm going to flee from this situation. Chances are your body was pumping a ton of cortisol to make yourself reactive to maybe a stressful situation. So we see that people who engaged in this high power pose for 2 minutes successfully decreased their cortisol levels. They felt more calm and collected in a situation. Whereas those who engaged in the low power pose had an increase with cortisol. So they felt maybe more anxious, more adrenaline, more stress reactive. So a few key takeaways from this research. First and foremost, if you're going into, let's say, a presentation where you have to be persuasive, you have to be calm, collected, confident, appear credible, consider doing a power pose prior to that communication situation. So maybe, the classic hands on the hips, the feet shoulder width apart, and just stand there for 2 minutes. Or you could even do the victory pose, where it's like you stretch your hands up above your head and you hold that pose for 2 minutes. And this may change, the chemical composition of your body and trick your mind into thinking you're more calm and collected than maybe what you initially felt. So that is, I think, the key takeaway. Um, the second key takeaway is simply by doing a power pose, you automatically make your body appear more confident and powerful. And so this could communicate nonverbally to other people that you are, in fact, in control. Another fascinating topic or study that I would like to share with you was a study done by these researchers in 2012. And this research is entitled Grin and Bear It: The Influence of Manipulated Facial Expressions on Stress Response. So what they did was they actually replicated an experiment done a long time ago. And this is the Duchamp smile, where the Duchamp smile was a study that looked at how different smiles could activate, our emotional states. And so what they found was that participants who had a neutral facial expression compared to those who had a standard smile where it's just activating the mouth, versus the Duchamp smile, which is activating other key features. There are two muscles, the muscles right here in your cheek, and then also right here along your eyes. And so you could usually tell when someone is engaged in an authentic, genuine smile is because they'll often have these wrinkles next to their eyelids, because essentially this muscle is contracting in order to bring up that smile. And so the researchers were interested in replicating this Duchamp smile study that was done, I think it was like 60s or 70s, to see if activating the Duchamp smile could actually decrease people's stress response. And so these participants went through a series of stress tests, and they were told that the study had to do with multitasking and not necessarily looking at how they're responding to the stressful environment. And those who activated the Duchamp smile, the authentic smile, right, which is this star chart, they were successfully able to reduce their heart rate much quicker compared to the other conditions. So really, really interesting to see how, smiling can also make us decrease the stress. It could also decrease, maybe our heart rate if we feel like we're spiraling out of control on, a stressful situation, right? So just some fascinating things to think about as it relates to nonverbal communication and persuasion. So in this brief presentation, we covered the nature and characteristics of nonverbal communication, the functions of nonverbal communication, and I discussed 4 predominant types of nonverbal communication, but the book talks about other aspects of nonverbal communication as well, such as artifacts, environments, and so forth. Physical appearances. There's even research on our sense of smell as a form of communication that explores, pheromones. It explores just scents. Why is it that oftentimes realtors, if they're showing a house, they will bring freshly baked chocolate chip cookies, because I don't know about you, but when you smell freshly baked chocolate chip cookies, that is just so inviting, and it just triggers like fond memories of walking into grandma's house, and talk about the connotative level of meaning that we associate with language. Maybe our senses trigger fond memories, a sense of love and warmth that could, I don't know, help a realtor sell a home, right? So there's so many different fascinating aspects of nonverbal communication, so many different trends in the research. To cover them all would be virtually impossible in a brief lecture like this. So hopefully this, by the end of this presentation, you're intrigued to study nonverbal communication as it relates to your interests as well. That's about it for today. So, thanks for paying attention and hanging out with me, and we'll see you next time.